I never believed in ghosts until my dead twin brother started living inside my body. My name is Michael, and what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that every word is true. Hit the like button right now if you're ready to hear the most terrifying story of supernatural possession you've ever encountered. Because what happened to me in Portland, Oregon, 3 years ago changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the unbreakable bond between twins. Marcus and I were identical twins, born exactly 3 minutes apart. I came first, he followed, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. Growing up in our suburban Portland home, people often commented on how eerily synchronized we were. We'd finish each other's sentences, feel each other's pain, and sometimes even dream the same dreams. Our parents, Sarah and David Thompson, used to joke that we shared one soul split between two bodies. I wish I had paid more attention to how prophetic those words would become. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar with a sibling, because the connection Marcus and I shared was beyond anything normal. We attended Portland State University together, studied computer science, and even dated girls who were best friends. At 22, we were planning to start a tech company together after graduation. Life was perfect, predictable, and safe. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment near campus, spending our days coding and our evenings playing video games or exploring Portland's food truck scene. Marcus was the outgoing one, always making friends wherever we went, while I was more reserved, preferring to observe from the sidelines. The accident happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Marcus had gone to meet his girlfriend, Jessica, at a coffee shop downtown, while I stayed home working on our senior project. At exactly 9:47 p.m., I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my chest, so sudden and intense that I doubled over, gasping for breath. The pain lasted maybe 10 seconds, then vanished completely, leaving me confused and shaken. I tried calling Marcus, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. In that inexplicable way twins sometimes know things about each other. 20 minutes later, I received the call that shattered my world. Marcus had been struck by a drunk driver while crossing the street to meet Jessica. The impact killed him instantly. The paramedic who called me said he died at 9:47 p.m., the exact moment I felt that stabbing chest pain. When I heard those words, something inside me broke in a way that can never be repaired. The other half of my soul was gone, ripped away without warning, leaving me feeling like an incomplete person stumbling through a world that no longer made sense. The funeral was a blur of tears, condolences, and flowers. Our parents were devastated, barely able to function through their grief. Jessica was inconsolable, clinging to me as if I could somehow replace what she'd lost. But I couldn't comfort anyone else because I was drowning in my own anguish. Standing at Marcus's graveside, watching them lower his casket into the ground, I felt like half of myself was being buried too. The pastor spoke about Marcus being in a better place, about how his spirit would live on, but those words felt hollow and meaningless. Dead was dead, and my brother was never coming back, or so I thought. The first month after Marcus's death passed in a haze of grief counseling, missed classes, and sleepless nights. I moved back in with our parents because I couldn't bear to be in our apartment surrounded by his belongings. His side of our shared bedroom remained exactly as he'd left it, textbooks scattered on his desk, clothes draped over his chair, his favorite Portland Trail Blazers poster still hanging on the wall. Our mother insisted we leave everything untouched, as if preserving his space could somehow preserve his presence. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories like this one, because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about the afterlife. Started having vivid dreams about Marcus, more real than any dream I'd ever experienced. In these dreams, he was trying to tell me something urgent, something important, but I could never quite understand what he was saying. He'd appear to me looking exactly as he had in life, wearing the same blue hoodie he died in, reaching out his hand toward me with an expression of desperate longing on his face. I'd wake up with tears on my cheeks and the strangest sensation that he'd actually been in the room with me. During the day, I'd catch glimpses of him in my peripheral vision, a flash of movement that looked exactly like Marcus turning a corner or walking through a doorway. But when I'd look directly, nothing would be there. Our parents were so consumed by their own grief that they didn't notice my increasing paranoia and exhaustion. I started avoiding mirrors because sometimes, just for a split second, I'd see Marcus's reflection instead of my own. I told myself it was just grief playing tricks on my mind, that losing a twin was bound to cause some psychological confusion. Then came the headaches. They started as mild discomfort, like pressure building behind my eyes, but quickly escalated into debilitating migraines that would leave me bedridden for hours. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A crushing, squeezing sensation that felt like someone was trying to force their way inside my skull. No medication helped. Doctors ran tests, checked for tumors, examined my brain from every angle, but found nothing wrong. The headaches followed no pattern I could identify, striking at random times with increasing frequency and intensity. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because looking back now, I realize those headaches were the first sign that Marcus was trying to come back. During the worst episodes, I'd hear whispers that sounded like his voice, so faint I couldn't be sure they were real. Sometimes I'd catch fragments of words, "Michael, help me, let me," but the pain would spike so severely that I'd lose consciousness before I could make sense of what I was hearing. 2 months after Marcus's death, something changed. I woke up one morning feeling different, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly how. There was a foreign sensation in my mind, like having a word on the tip of your tongue that you can't quite remember. I went about my normal routine, showering, eating breakfast, getting dressed, but something felt off, like I was going through the motions without being fully present. Our mother commented that I seemed more like myself than I had in weeks, which struck me as odd because I felt less like myself than ever. That afternoon, while organizing some of Marcus's things, I found his journal hidden under his mattress. I'd never known he kept one. As I flipped through the pages reading his thoughts about school, relationships, and our future plans, I came across an entry that made my blood run cold. It was dated just 3 days before his death. I had the strangest dream last night. I was standing in a place that wasn't quite darkness, but wasn't light either. There was this pull, like something was trying to drag me somewhere I didn't want to go. But I also sensed Michael there with me, like we were connected by some invisible thread. If something ever happens to me, I hope that connection is strong enough to find a way back to him. So to share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because what I discovered next will haunt you forever. Reading those words, I felt that foreign sensation in my mind intensify, like something stirring to life inside my thoughts. That night I dreamed of Marcus again, but this time the dream felt different, more vivid, more real, more urgent. He was standing in what looked like our childhood bedroom, but the walls were shifting and breathing like they were alive. "I'm so close, Michael," he said, his voice crystal clear for the first time since he'd died. "I just need you to let me in. We can be together again. We can be whole." I woke up with tears streaming down my face and the absolute certainty that my dead twin brother was trying to possess my body. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because what happened over the next few weeks defied every rational explanation I could think of. The foreign sensation in my mind grew stronger, evolving from a vague awareness into something that felt distinctly like another consciousness sharing space inside my head. At first it was subtle, moments where I'd find myself humming songs that Marcus loved but I'd never particularly cared for, or craving foods that were his favorites, but had never appealed to me. Hit the like button if this story is giving you chills, because the changes in my behavior became impossible to ignore. I started unconsciously adopting Marcus's mannerisms, the way he'd tap his fingers when he was thinking, how he'd run his hand through his hair when he was nervous, the particular way he'd laugh at jokes that weren't that funny. Our parents noticed immediately, and instead of being comforted by these familiar gestures, they seemed disturbed by them. "You're acting so much like Marcus," our mother whispered one evening, tears in her eyes. "It's like having him back, but wrong somehow." Wrong was exactly the right word for what was happening to me. I'd catch myself in the middle of conversations speaking in Marcus's more confident, outgoing tone instead of my natural reserved manner. His vocabulary started creeping into my speech, words and phrases he'd used regularly but I never had. When I tried to resist these changes, to consciously act more like myself, the headaches would return with vicious intensity, as if something inside my skull was punishing me for fighting back. The mirror incidents became more frequent and undeniable. I'd be brushing my teeth or washing my face, and suddenly Marcus's reflection would be staring back at me instead of my own. Not just a glimpse or a trick of light. His actual face, with his slightly different smile and the small scar above his left eyebrow from when we'd crashed our bikes as kids. The first few times, I'd blink hard and my normal reflection would return, leaving me questioning my sanity. But as the days passed, Marcus's reflection would linger longer, sometimes even moving independently of my own actions. Subscribe for more terrifying true stories like this one, because the night terrors that began during this period were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I'd fall asleep normally, but instead of regular dreams, I'd find myself in a place that wasn't quite sleep and wasn't quite waking. In this liminal space, I could feel Marcus's presence more clearly than ever before. He'd speak to me with increasing urgency, his voice growing stronger and more insistent with each encounter. "You have to understand, Michael," he'd plead, his ghostly form becoming more solid-looking each time I saw him. "I'm not really dead, not completely. Part of me is still here, still connected to you. We shared everything in life. Why can't we share this too? I just need to borrow your body sometimes. We can take turns. You'd still be you, just enhanced, completed." The logic of his argument seemed flawless in these dream states, but when I'd wake up, the horror of what he was suggesting would hit me full force. My dead brother wanted to possess me, to use my body as a vessel for his consciousness. The very idea should have been repulsive, but there was a part of me, a growing part, that found the prospect strangely appealing. I missed Marcus so desperately that the chance to have him back, even in this twisted way, felt like an answer to my deepest prayers. Comment below what you think I should have done, because my resistance was crumbling with each passing day. The headaches intensified whenever I tried to fight the changes happening to me, but they'd disappear completely when I gave in to Marcus's influence. It was becoming easier to just let him guide my actions, to surrender control rather than endure the constant pain of resistance. I started losing chunks of time, minutes or sometimes hours, where I'd come back to myself with no memory of what I'd been doing. During one of these blackout periods, I apparently called Jessica and asked her to meet me at the coffee shop where Marcus had been heading the night he died. When my awareness returned, I was sitting across from her in a booth and she was crying. "You sounded exactly like him on the phone," she sobbed. "The way you spoke, the things you said. Michael, what's happening to you?" I wanted to tell her the truth, but how could I explain that my dead boyfriend was slowly taking over my living brother's body? Instead, I made excuses about grief affecting me in strange ways and promised to see a therapist. But privately, I was beginning to understand that this wasn't a psychological problem that counseling could fix. This was something supernatural, something that existed beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because the physical changes started around this time too. I'd always been the slightly smaller twin. Marcus had been maybe 10 pounds heavier and a bit more muscular from playing intramural basketball. But now, looking in the mirror during my lucid moments, I could see my body changing. My shoulders were broadening, my arms were gaining muscle mass I hadn't worked for, and even my posture was shifting to match Marcus's more confident stance. Our parents were starting to get worried about my behavior. I'd apparently been having conversations with them that I had no memory of, discussions where I demonstrated knowledge of things only Marcus would have known. Details about his relationship with Jessica that he'd never shared with me. Memories from our childhood that had been uniquely his. Opinions about people and situations that I'd never formed myself. When they'd confront me about these conversations, I'd have no recollection of them whatsoever. "It's like you're becoming him," our father said during one particularly tense family dinner. "Sometimes when you speak, I forget which son I'm talking to. It's not natural, Michael. It's not healthy." But I was starting to wonder if healthy even mattered anymore. The more Marcus's presence grew inside me, the less empty I felt. The crushing grief that had been my constant companion since his death was fading, replaced by a strange sense of completeness. When he was in control, I felt whole again, like the missing piece of my soul had been restored. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, impossible, but that voice was getting weaker every day. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because the dreams were becoming more elaborate and convincing. Marcus would show me visions of our future together, how we could share one body but maintain both of our consciousnesses. how we could accomplish twice as much because we'd never truly be alone. He painted pictures of a life where death hadn't separated us, where the bond we'd shared since birth could continue indefinitely. "Think about it," he'd whisper during these nocturnal visits. "You'll never have to miss me again. I'll always be right here with you. We'll be closer than we ever were in life. Isn't that what you've wanted since the moment I died? To have me back?" He was right, and that's what terrified me most of all. I did want him back desperately enough that I was willing to surrender my own identity to make it happen. The line between Michael and Marcus was blurring more each day, and I was losing the ability to tell where I ended and he began. Sometimes I'd look in the mirror and genuinely not know which twin was staring back at me. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because by the end of the second month, I was experiencing full possession episodes that lasted for hours. I'd wake up to find that Marcus had been living my life, going to classes I didn't remember attending, having conversations with friends who would later tell me I'd been different that day, making plans and decisions that I'd had no part in forming. During these episodes, according to witnesses, I was completely myself, just a version of myself that acted exactly like Marcus. The most disturbing part was that I was starting to enjoy it. When Marcus was in control, the constant ache of grief disappeared. I felt confident, outgoing, complete. It was only during my lucid periods that the horror of the situation would crash down on me. I was losing myself piece by piece, and the worst part was that I was beginning to want it to happen. The promise of never having to feel the pain of separation again was becoming too tempting to resist. But Marcus was growing impatient with sharing. The gentle whispers of the early days were becoming demanding commands. "Stop fighting me," he'd hiss during the painful transition periods. "You know this is what we both want. Just let go completely. Trust me, Michael. Have I ever steered you wrong?" As the 2-month anniversary of his death approached, I could feel something building inside me, a presence that was no longer content to visit occasionally, but wanted to move in permanently. Marcus wasn't just trying to possess me anymore. He was trying to replace me entirely. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because the night everything changed started like any other. I went to bed feeling relatively normal, with Marcus's presence just a whisper at the back of my mind. But instead of the usual gradual transition into his influence, I was jolted awake at 3 a.m. by the sound of my own voice having a conversation. I was sitting up in bed speaking out loud in Marcus's characteristic tone and cadence, having what appeared to be a phone conversation with someone I couldn't see. "I know, Jess. I know," I heard myself saying in Marcus's voice. "I'm sorry I left you like that, but I'm back now and I'm not going anywhere ever again." My hand was holding an invisible phone to my ear, and I was nodding and responding to words only I could hear. The rational part of my mind that was still me watched in horror as my body carried on this one-sided conversation for nearly 20 minutes. When the episode ended, I snapped back to full awareness with such jarring suddenness that I felt nauseated. My throat was sore as if I'd been talking for hours, and there was a text message on my actual phone from Jessica. "Michael, I just had the strangest dream. Marcus called me and we talked for the longest time. It felt so real. Please tell me you're okay." Hit the like button if this story gave you chills, because that was the moment I finally understood that this wasn't just my grief-stricken imagination playing tricks on me. Marcus was genuinely present, genuinely conscious, and genuinely using my body to interact with the world of the living. The supernatural was real, possession was possible, and my dead twin brother had found a way to cheat death by claiming my life as his own. I rushed to our parents' room and woke them up, desperate to tell someone what was happening before I lost the courage or the clarity to explain. "Mom, Dad, I need help," I pleaded, shaking them awake. "Something's wrong with me. Marcus he's inside me somehow. He's taking over my body." The looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know about how that sounded. Our mother's eyes filled with tears while our father's expression hardened with concern. "Michael, honey," Mom whispered, "you've been through tremendous trauma. Sometimes grief can manifest in ways that feel very real, but this isn't grief," I interrupted, probably sounding exactly as unhinged as I felt. "He talks to me at night. He controls my body when I'm not paying attention. He called Jessica using my voice while I was asleep. This is real supernatural possession, and I don't know how to stop it." Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because my parents' reaction was exactly what I'd feared. They insisted on taking me to see a psychiatrist the next morning, convinced that I was having some kind of psychological breakdown. Dr. Reynolds, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, listened patiently as I tried to explain what was happening. She took notes, asked probing questions about my relationship with Marcus, and ultimately diagnosed me with complicated grief disorder with possible dissociative episodes. It's not uncommon for surviving twins to experience identity confusion after loss, she explained gently. The bond between twins is so profound that when one dies, the survivor sometimes unconsciously adopts aspects of their personality as a coping mechanism. What you're experiencing feels very real, but it's your mind's way of keeping Marcus alive. But even as she spoke, I could feel Marcus stirring inside my consciousness, amused by her clinical explanation. His presence had grown so strong that I could sense his emotions as clearly as my own, and he found the psychiatrist's rational theories hilarious. "Tell her about the coffee shop," he whispered in my mind. "Tell her about the reflection. Tell her about things only I would know." And subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories like this one, because I decided to test Dr. Reynolds' theory by sharing information that only Marcus could have possessed. I told her about a conversation he'd had with Jessica just days before his death, details about their relationship that he'd never shared with me. I described a hiding place in our childhood bedroom where he'd kept a collection of comic books that even our parents didn't know about. I recounted word for word a fight he'd had with our father about his choice of college major, an argument I'd overheard but hadn't been directly involved in. Dr. Reynolds took notes on everything I said, but her expression remained professionally skeptical. Twins often absorb more information about each other's lives than they consciously realize, she explained. During times of extreme stress, this unconscious knowledge can surface in ways that feel supernatural, but have perfectly rational explanations. That night, Marcus proved her wrong in the most terrifying way possible. I woke up to find myself standing in our kitchen at 2 a.m., fully dressed in clothes I didn't remember putting on. My car keys were in my hand, and according to the clock, I'd been standing there for over an hour, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. But this time, instead of snapping back to normal awareness, I found myself sharing consciousness with Marcus, both of us present and aware simultaneously. "We're going to see Jessica," he said, his voice clear and distinct inside our shared mind. "She needs to know I'm still here. She needs to understand that death doesn't have to mean goodbye." I tried to resist, to put the keys down and go back to bed, but my body wouldn't obey my commands. Marcus was in complete control of our physical form, while I remained a helpless passenger in my own skull. The sensation was indescribable, like being trapped inside a glass cage, able to see and hear everything but powerless to influence anything. I could feel every step he took, every breath he drew, every movement he made with my body, but I was nothing more than an observer. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because the drive to Jessica's apartment was a nightmare of lost control. Marcus drove with his characteristic confidence, using my hands to adjust the radio to his favorite stations, humming songs I'd never heard before in a voice that was mine but somehow wasn't. He knew exactly where she lived even though I'd never been to her new place. She'd moved after Marcus died, unable to bear staying in the apartment they'd shared. When we arrived, Marcus used my phone to call her. "Jess, it's me, I'm outside. I know it's late, but I really need to see you." My voice, but his words, his inflection, his way of speaking. From inside our shared consciousness, I could feel his love for her, his desperate need to reassure her that their relationship didn't have to end just because his body had died. Jessica came to the door in her pajamas, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw us, her face went white. "Michael," she whispered, but even as she said my name, I could see the confusion in her eyes. Something about our posture, our expression, the way we were looking at her, told her this wasn't really me standing on her doorstep. "Hello, beautiful," Marcus said with my voice, and Jessica's knees nearly buckled. Those were the exact words he'd used to greet her every single day of their relationship. Words I'd never said to anyone, delivered in a tone that was unmistakably his despite coming from my mouth. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because what happened next confirmed beyond any doubt that the supernatural was real, and Marcus was genuinely possessing me. Jessica invited us inside, her hands shaking as she closed the door behind us. For the next 2 hours, Marcus carried on a conversation with her that I couldn't have faked, even if I'd wanted to. He referenced private jokes they'd shared, memories from dates I'd never been on, intimate details about their relationship that he'd never discussed with me. He knew about the fight they'd had the week before his death, the makeup plans they'd made, the anniversary gift he'd been secretly saving money to buy her. He knew about her job interview the following week, her concerns about her mother's health, her plans to change her major from English to social work. Information that had died with him, knowledge that existed nowhere in my memory or experience, yet flowed effortlessly from my lips in his voice. "I know this is impossible," Marcus said, reaching out to touch Jessica's face with my hand. "I know it doesn't make sense, but some connections are stronger than death, Jess. Our love, my bond with Michael, these things transcend the physical world. I found a way back to you, to both of you." Jessica was crying, torn between joy at hearing Marcus's voice and horror at the impossibility of the situation. "This isn't real," she kept whispering. "You're dead. I saw them bury you. This can't be happening." But Marcus proved his identity beyond any reasonable doubt. He told her things only he could have known, displayed mannerisms that were uniquely his, shared emotions and memories that belonged exclusively to their relationship. By the time we left her apartment 3 hours later, Jessica was convinced that something genuinely supernatural was occurring, that the love of her life had somehow found a way to return from beyond the grave. Let me know if you want a part 2 to this story, because the ride home was when Marcus finally revealed his true intentions. Instead of the gentle, loving presence he'd been presenting to Jessica, his consciousness inside my mind turned cold and demanding. "She understands now," he said with satisfaction. "She knows I'm really here. But this sharing arrangement isn't working for me anymore, Michael. I need full control." "What do you mean?" I asked from inside our shared thoughts. Though I was terrified, I already knew the answer. "I mean, it's time for you to step aside permanently," Marcus replied, his mental voice taking on a cruel edge I'd never heard from him in life. "I've been patient, I've been gentle, but I'm tired of fighting you for control of my own existence. This body should be mine by right of survival. I'm the one who knows how to live. You've just been stumbling around in grief and confusion since I died." The horrible truth was becoming clear. This wasn't about sharing or maintaining our twin bond beyond death. Marcus wanted to completely replace me, to use my body to resume the life that had been cut short by his accident. The loving brother I'd mourned was gone, replaced by something selfish and possessive that saw my continued existence as an inconvenience to be eliminated. Comment below what you think I should have done, because as we pulled into our parents' driveway, I realized I was fighting for more than just control of my body. I was fighting for my very survival against a supernatural force that had once been the person I loved most in the world. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because what happened when we got home that night was the beginning of the most terrifying supernatural battle of my life. As soon as I walked through the front door, I could feel Marcus's presence expanding inside my consciousness like a cancer, pushing against the boundaries of my thoughts and memories with aggressive force. The gentle whispers and subtle influences of the past months were gone, replaced by an overwhelming assault on my very identity. "Stop fighting me," Marcus's voice roared inside my skull. No longer the loving brother who had comforted me in dreams, but something cold and predatory that wore his face. "You've had your chance to grieve, to accept what's happening. Now it's time for you to let go completely. I have a life to live, and I'm not going to let your weakness hold me back." Hit the like button if this story is giving you chills, because the pain that followed his words was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It felt like someone was taking a crowbar to the inside of my skull, prying apart the very foundations of my consciousness. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and I collapsed in our parents' living room, writhing on the floor as Marcus launched a full-scale assault on my mind. But this time, instead of the gradual erosion of my identity that I'd been experiencing for months, something inside me snapped into focus with crystal clarity. Maybe it was the realization that my brother, the person I'd loved and mourned and missed so desperately, was gone, replaced by something that wanted to erase me entirely. Maybe it was the primal survival instinct finally kicking in. Whatever it was, I found reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed and began fighting back with everything I had. "No," I gasped aloud, my voice echoing strangely in the empty house. Our parents were asleep upstairs, unaware that a supernatural war was being waged in their living room. "This is my body, my life, my existence. You're dead, Marcus. You're supposed to be dead." The response was immediate and vicious. My body began convulsing as if I were having a seizure, but I remained conscious throughout the entire ordeal. I could feel Marcus's rage and frustration as he realized I wasn't going to surrender without a fight. Through my shared consciousness with him, I experienced his memories of death, the moment of impact, the sensation of his soul being torn from his body, the confusion and terror of finding himself adrift in some gray space between life and death. "You don't understand what it's like," he snarled, his mental voice dripping with resentment. "You don't know what it means to be conscious but powerless, to exist without form, to watch everyone you love move on while you're trapped in nothingness." I found a way back, Michael. I fought my way back to the living world, and I'm not going to let you send me back to that void. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because through our supernatural connection, I began to understand the true horror of Marcus's situation. He hadn't found peace in death. He'd been trapped in some kind of liminal space, aware but unable to interact with the physical world, watching helplessly as his loved ones grieved and moved on without him. The bond we'd shared as twins had been his lifeline, the only connection strong enough to pull him back from whatever realm the dead were supposed to inhabit. But in his desperation to return to life, something fundamental about Marcus had changed. The loving, protective brother I'd known had been twisted by his experience of death into something selfish and destructive. He'd convinced himself that my body rightfully belonged to him, that his need to exist had been justified by the trauma of his death and his desperate desire to live again. Subscribe for more terrifying true stories like this one, because the physical manifestations of our supernatural battle were becoming impossible to ignore. Objects in the living room began moving on their own, picture frames tilting sideways, books falling from shelves, the television turning on and off repeatedly. The temperature in the room plummeted so suddenly that I could see my breath, and the lights flickered erratically, as if responding to the conflict raging inside my consciousness. Through our shared awareness, I could feel Marcus drawing energy from somewhere beyond the physical world, tapping into forces that didn't belong in the realm of the living. His presence inside my mind grew stronger and more oppressive with each passing moment, like a parasite feeding off my life force to sustain its own existence. I realized with growing horror that he wasn't just trying to possess me, he was trying to consume me entirely, to absorb my consciousness into his own, until nothing of Michael Thompson remained. "You feel it now, don't you?" Marcus taunted, his mental voice taking on an inhuman quality that bore little resemblance to the brother I'd loved. "You feel how weak you are compared to me. I've been strengthened by death, Michael. I've seen things beyond the veil that you can't even imagine. I've learned to exist without flesh, to maintain consciousness through pure will. What have you done except stumble through life taking everything for granted? Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because the supernatural assault intensified beyond anything I could have prepared for. My body began moving against my will, not with the smooth control Marcus had demonstrated earlier, but with jerky, unnatural movements, as if two different consciousnesses were fighting for control of the same nervous system. I'd raise my right hand while my left hand moved independently, creating a grotesque puppet show of competing intentions. The mirrors throughout the house began reflecting impossible images. In the living room mirror, I could see both Marcus and myself standing side by side, though only one physical body occupied the space. His reflection looked more solid and real than mine, which appeared translucent and fading. In the hallway mirror, our reflections were superimposed on each other, creating a disturbing double exposure effect that made it impossible to tell where one twin ended and the other began. "Look at yourself," Marcus commanded, forcing my head to turn toward the mirror. "You're already disappearing. You're already becoming me. Stop prolonging the inevitable and just let go." But something deep inside me rebelled against his words. Yes, I had wanted him back. Yes, I had been willing to share my body with him out of love and grief. but I hadn't consented to be erased, to have my entire identity consumed by his desperate need to return to life. The Michael Thompson who had been born 3 minutes before Marcus, who had lived 22 years as his own person, who had thoughts and dreams and desires that were uniquely his own. That person deserved to exist. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because the moment I made the conscious decision to fight for my survival, the supernatural battle reached its climax. The living room exploded into chaos as every object not nailed down began flying through the air. Picture frames shattered against walls, books launched themselves across the room, and furniture slid across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. The sound was deafening, not just the crash of objects, but an inhuman shrieking that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Through our shared consciousness, I realized the sound was coming from Marcus, his frustration and rage manifesting as supernatural phenomena that threatened to tear our parents' house apart. Upstairs, I could hear our mother and father waking up, their confused and frightened voices calling out to ask what was happening. "Fine," Marcus snarled, his mental voice now completely devoid of any brotherly affection. "If you won't surrender willingly, I'll take what's mine by force. I'll rip your consciousness apart piece by piece until there's nothing left but me." The pain that followed was indescribable. It felt like someone was reaching into my brain with molten claws, tearing at the very essence of who I was. Memories began disappearing, not just fading, but being actively torn away from me. I watched helplessly as my first day of school vanished from my mind, followed by my first kiss, my high school graduation, conversations with friends whose faces I could no longer remember. Comment below what you think I should have done, because I was literally watching my life being erased by my dead brother's supernatural hunger. But in that moment of ultimate violation, something unexpected happened. The memories Marcus was stealing weren't just disappearing. I could sense them being absorbed into his consciousness, becoming part of his identity instead of mine. And that's when I realized his fatal mistake. In trying to consume my memories, my experiences, my very essence, Marcus was also absorbing the guilt and horror I felt about what he was doing to me. Through our supernatural connection, he began experiencing my terror, my sense of betrayal, my desperate love for the brother he used to be. For the first time since beginning his possession, Marcus was forced to confront the reality of what he had become. "Stop," he whispered, his mental voice suddenly uncertain. I can feel what you're feeling. The fear, the love, Oh God, Michael, what have I done to you? Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because that moment of hesitation was all I needed. Using every ounce of strength I possessed, I pushed back against Marcus's presence with the force of someone fighting for their very existence. But instead of trying to expel him completely, I did something that surprised both of us. I embraced him with the same love I'd always felt, even as I firmly established my boundaries. "I love you, Marcus," I said aloud, my voice echoing strangely in the chaos of the destroyed living room. "I've missed you every single day since you died, but I won't let you erase me. I won't let you become something evil just because you're afraid of death." The supernatural phenomena stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Objects hung suspended in midair for a moment, before gently floating back to their original positions. The temperature returned to normal, the lights stopped flickering, and in profound silence fell over the house. Through our shared consciousness, I could feel Marcus's confusion and dawning horror at what he had almost done. "I was so scared," he whispered, his mental voice now sounding like the brother I remembered. "Being dead, Michael. It's not peaceful. It's not rest. It's just emptiness. Awareness without purpose. Consciousness without form. When I found a way back to you, I thought I could just take your place, live your life. But I can feel your memories now, your experiences, and I understand what I was trying to steal from you. Let me know if you want a part 2 to this story, because what happened next changed both of us forever. Instead of continuing to fight, we found a way to coexist that neither of us had considered before. Not sharing the body, not taking turns controlling it, but something far more profound. A true merging of consciousness that preserved both of our identities while creating something entirely new. The process was unlike anything I can adequately describe. It felt like two rivers flowing together to form a single larger waterway, distinct sources combining to create something that was both and neither simultaneously. I remained Michael, with all my memories and personality intact. But I also became something more. Marcus's experiences, his knowledge, his perspective on existence beyond death became part of me without erasing who I had always been. When our parents finally made it downstairs to investigate the commotion, they found me sitting calmly in the middle of what should have been a destroyed living room, but was now mysteriously restored to perfect order. I looked up at them with eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had died and the innocence of someone who had never left the living world. "I'm okay," I told them, and for the first time since Marcus's death, that statement was completely true. We're okay. Comment below what you think really happened here, because explaining the aftermath of supernatural possession to the people you love is nearly impossible when you're not entirely sure you understand it yourself. Our parents stood in the doorway of the living room, staring at me with a mixture of relief and deep concern. They had heard the noise, felt the house shake, seen the lights flickering throughout the entire building, but now everything appeared normal except for their son sitting on the floor with a strangely peaceful expression. "Michael," our mother whispered, approaching me cautiously as if I might suddenly explode into supernatural chaos again. "What happened down here?" We heard crashes, screaming. It sounded like the house was being torn apart. I looked up at her with what I knew must be a disconcerting combination of my own familiar features and something indefinably different in my expression. The truth was that I was still me, Michael Thompson, 22 years old, computer science student, surviving twin, but I was also more than that now. Marcus's consciousness hadn't disappeared or been expelled. It had integrated with mine in a way that preserved both of our identities while creating something unprecedented. Hit the like button if this story gave you chills, because trying to explain supernatural possession to grieving parents requires a delicate balance of honesty and compassion. "I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible," I began, standing up with movements that felt both familiar and foreign. "Marcus found a way back, not as a ghost, not as a separate spirit, but as part of me. We're together now, really together." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief and fear. Our father's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, concern, and finally a kind of resigned worry that suggested he was prepared to have me committed to a psychiatric facility, if necessary. Our mother just stared at me, tears streaming down her face as if she could see something in my features that confirmed her worst fears about my mental state. "Honey," she said gently, "you've been through tremendous trauma. Sometimes when we lose someone we love, especially someone as close as a twin, our minds create elaborate fantasies to help us cope. But Marcus is gone, sweetheart. We buried him 2 months ago. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying true stories like this one, because what happened next proved that the supernatural integration was real and permanent. Without consciously deciding to do it, I began speaking in a voice that was unmistakably Marcus's, though it came from my throat. "Mom, remember when I was 7 and I broke your favorite vase playing baseball in the house? I hid the pieces under my bed for 3 weeks before you found them. You made me do extra chores for a month, but you never told Dad because you knew he would have been really angry." Our mother's face went white. The incident I had just described was something that had happened to Marcus alone. I hadn't been involved in breaking the vase or hiding the evidence. It was one of those sibling secrets that gets buried in the complexity of growing up, a memory that had never been shared or discussed in the family. There was no way I could have known those details unless Marcus had somehow told me. "And Dad," I continued, still speaking in Marcus's voice, "remember the night before I left for college when you came into our room and told me you were proud of the man I was becoming? You thought Michael was asleep, but he wasn't. He heard everything you said about how I reminded you of yourself at that age, how you hoped I would make better choices than you did. That meant everything to me." Our father staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. The conversation I was referencing had indeed taken place, but it was one of those private father-son moments that neither of them had ever acknowledged afterward. Again, there was no rational way for me to possess that information unless something genuinely supernatural had occurred. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because the proof of Marcus's continued existence went beyond just memories. Over the following days, I found myself possessing knowledge and skills that belonged exclusively to him. I could play songs on the guitar that I'd never learned, using techniques that Marcus had practiced for years while I'd focused on other interests. I knew the combination to a safety deposit box he'd rented without telling anyone, containing letters he'd written to Jessica that were meant to be delivered if anything ever happened to him. Most unnervingly, I retained his muscle memory for activities I'd never participated in. I could shoot basketball free throws with the precise form he'd developed through years of practice, execute skateboard tricks that I'd never attempted, and even drive using the specific habits and preferences that had been uniquely his. My body moved with a confidence and competence in areas where Michael Thompson had always been awkward or inexperienced. The changes weren't just physical. My personality had expanded to encompass aspects of Marcus's character that had been foreign to me in life. I found myself more outgoing in social situations, more willing to take risks, more comfortable being the center of attention. But these weren't changes that felt imposed or artificial. They felt like natural extensions of who I had always been, as if Marcus's traits were filling in gaps in my personality rather than replacing existing characteristics. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because the most challenging aspect of this supernatural integration was learning to navigate relationships with people who had known us as separate individuals. Jessica was the most complicated situation. She could see Marcus in my expressions, hear him in my voice, but she was also talking to Michael, the brother of her deceased boyfriend, not the boyfriend himself. "It's really you, isn't it?" she asked during one of our early conversations after the integration. Not just Michael remembering things Marcus told him, but actually you. "It's both of us," I replied, and my voice carried harmonics of both twins simultaneously. "I'm Marcus, but I'm also Michael. We're not sharing this body or taking turns controlling it. We've become something new, something that incorporates both of our identities while remaining a single, coherent consciousness." The concept was difficult for everyone to understand, including myself. I wasn't experiencing multiple personality disorder or dissociative episodes. I wasn't hearing Marcus's voice as a separate entity or feeling controlled by an external force. Instead, I had become a person whose identity genuinely encompassed both of our histories, both of our personalities, both of our ways of seeing the world. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because the integration came with unexpected benefits and challenges. On the positive side, I felt more complete than I ever had in life. The crushing grief that had defined my existence since Marcus's death was gone, replaced by a sense of wholeness that was beyond anything I'd experienced as just one half of a twin pair. I had access to both of our skill sets, both of our knowledge bases, both of our emotional perspectives on every situation, but there were also disturbing aspects to my new existence. Sometimes I would catch myself having opinions or making decisions that I couldn't clearly attribute to either Michael or Marcus specifically. It was as if the integration had created new aspects of personality that belonged to neither of my original identities. I found myself questioning which thoughts were really mine and which were products of our supernatural merger. The physical changes were subtle but noticeable to people who had known us well. My facial features seemed to incorporate elements of both twins, creating an appearance that was familiar but somehow different from either Michael or Marcus individually. My voice carried tones and inflections from both of us, and my mannerisms were a blend of characteristics that had previously been distinct to each twin. Comment below what you think I should have done, because the most profound change was in my understanding of death and consciousness. Through Marcus's memories of his experience between life and whatever came after, I had knowledge of realms beyond the physical world that no living person should possess. I understood that consciousness could exist independently of the body, that identity could persist beyond death, and that the bonds between souls could transcend the boundaries of mortality. This knowledge was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it confirmed that death wasn't the end of existence, that the people we love continue in some form beyond the grave. Terrifying because it revealed that the afterlife wasn't the peaceful rest that most religious traditions promised, but something far more complex and potentially frightening. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because 3 years have passed since the night of the integration, and I've learned to live with the reality of being both Michael and Marcus simultaneously. Our parents have gradually accepted that something supernatural occurred, even if they don't fully understand it. They've learned to recognize when Marcus's aspects of my personality are more prominent and when Michael's characteristics are in the foreground. Jessica and I eventually developed a relationship that defied conventional categories. We weren't exactly romantic partners since I wasn't precisely her deceased boyfriend, but we also weren't just friends, since I retained all of Marcus's love for her, along with memories of their entire relationship. We created something new, a connection that honored both her past with Marcus and her present with the integrated person I had become. I finished college with a double major in computer science and psychology, driven by both Michael's original interests and Marcus's posthumous fascination with consciousness and identity. I'm currently pursuing graduate studies in consciousness research, hoping to understand the mechanisms behind what happened to us and whether similar supernatural integrations might be possible for other bereaved twins. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because the most important lesson I've learned from this experience is that love truly can transcend death, but not always in the ways we expect or hope. The desperate grief that drives supernatural phenomena like possession isn't necessarily evil, but it can become destructive if it prioritizes reunion over respect for the living. Marcus's initial attempt to erase my identity came from a place of fear and loneliness rather than malice, but it could have destroyed both of us if we hadn't found a better way. I still don't fully understand the mechanics of what happened to us. I don't know if our integration was possible because of some unique aspect of twin psychology, or if it was the result of circumstances that could be replicated by others who have lost someone they love. What I do know is that I am living proof that consciousness is far more flexible and mysterious than most people believe, and that the bonds between souls can create possibilities that science and religion have barely begun to explore. If you're dealing with the loss of someone close to you, especially a twin or sibling, please know that the grief you're feeling is valid and powerful enough to create experiences that defy rational explanation. But also know that the goal should never be to bring back the dead at the expense of the living. True love finds ways to honor both the departed and the survivors, creating something new rather than simply trying to restore what was lost. The integration that Marcus and I achieved isn't something I would recommend to others, and I'm not even sure it's something that could be deliberately replicated. It was born from specific circumstances, supernatural possession, twin telepathy, and a love strong enough to find compromise even in the face of extinction. But it has given me a unique perspective on the nature of identity, consciousness, and the mysterious connections that bind us to the people we love. I am Michael Thompson, and I am Marcus Thompson, and I am someone entirely new who carries the best of both identities while honoring the memory of who we each were separately. This is my story, our story, and proof that sometimes the most terrifying supernatural experiences can lead to the most beautiful and unexpected forms of healing. Comment below if you've experienced anything similar. Subscribe for more supernatural content, and remember that love really can conquer death, just not always in the ways we expect.